and welcome to the final episode in my mini podcast series. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. This time I'll be talking about LGBTQ+ issues in development economics. As always, the transcript and references are attached in this episode's description. I encourage you to do more research of your own if this is something that interests you. The economic well-being of LGBTQ+ people in the Global South is underexplored by the development industry. Economic well-being means having both present and future financial security. Worldwide, limits to the freedom of LGBTQ+ people are causing economic inefficiencies. Economic well-being can make such a big difference to people's lives. It can lift people out of poverty, and for LGBTQ+ people, it can mean getting to live a life true to yourself. NGOs don't tend to address these issues. Let's discuss why they should. The lack of support for LGBTQ+ people isn't something that only affects their livelihood, but also affects the economy as a whole. LGBTQ+ people make up at least 1 to 5% of the population, with many arguing it is more than that. Underutilising this many people through social exclusion can have a big impact on economic output. Even just one additional right in the Global Index on Legal Recognition of Homosexual Orientation has been associated with $1,400 more in per capita GDP and a higher Human Development Index value. Effective LGBTQ+ policies can make a big difference, an impact felt not just on the individual level, but on the wider economy. Focusing more on this traditionally under-focused area rather than hyper-focusing on overcrowded areas of development and LGBTQ+ issues could bring with it big changes. Poverty is a key area for development, with NGOs being seen as a way of combating it. Limited social protection policies increase the likelihood of LGBTQ+ people struggling with poverty. Discrimination and exclusion, including lack of access to jobs and education, housing barriers and familial rejection, increases the chance of LGBTQ+ community members' poverty. The problem is that NGOs in the development industry fall into patterns of fixing the problem once it's happened, rather than seeing the struggle LGBTQ+ people go through as preventable. They deal with the aftermath. NGOs are capable of providing this kind of support. They use preventative measures in reproductive rights work. They just need to find ways of applying this practice across the board, including in the prevention of poverty for sexual and gender identity marginalised groups. Often when people think of discrimination, their minds go to unequal marriage rights or an angry man shouting homophobic abuse on the street. But discrimination is more nuanced than that. This kind of discrimination is pervasive, but often goes unnoticed. Employment is a major source of LGBTQ+ struggles, with workplace discrimination remaining even once a worker has secured a job, as they risk low job retention as well as lacking professional development. Often workers have to hide their identities or work somewhere where they don't serve customers, massively impacting the mental health of LGBTQ+ employees. Workplace discrimination is the perfect place for NGOs to make a difference. Discrimination and mental health are linked, so by addressing one aspect, NGOs could have a big impact on the other. Addressing workplace discrimination could improve the economic outcomes of LGBTQ+ people, improve their acceptance in the community, and improve their well-being. This discrimination is something that is starting to be picked up on by some institutions. For example, here is a clip from the UN's Free and Equal campaign video.
A study that looked at 39 countries found a clear link between the marginalization of a country's LGBT community and a corresponding loss of potential economic output. The cost of homophobia and transphobia is simply colossal. from a shrunken labor force and a flight of talent to lost productivity. According to a recent World Bank pilot study, discrimination against lesbian, gay, bi, and trans people could be costing an economy the size of India's up to $32 billion a year. The drag on growth filters into lower tax receipts for the government, meaning less money for health, education, and other essential services. No wonder the UN calls combating homophobia and transphobia both a human rights priority and a development imperative.
This shows how being LGBTQ+ in development is starting to be talked about much more widely. However, for LGBTQ+ people, hiding your identity is very commonplace in the workplace. Fearing verbal abuse, violence, or discrimination from the workplace, with stories of LGBTQ+ employees having to pay penalty wages for being themselves, this is hardly a surprise. A 2012 study in Nicaragua found that over 50% of MSM were worried that being out would cost them their job. Many lesbians in Latin America purposefully dress and present femme as they can earn more than if they were presenting butch. Trans people risk being fired if they transition. There are so many more stories like these. Hiding who they are is a very common defense mechanism for LGBTQ+ people. They face the choice of living authentically as themselves or having a job. This is something seen across the gender and sexual minority spectrum worldwide, yet it is something traditionally not addressed by governments, development agencies, or NGOs. Job searching can be a major challenge for LGBTQ+ people, often being refused a job because of their gender and sexual identity or suspected identities. There is limited information about this for the Global South, as data often isn't collected. However, we can see these patterns worldwide. In Eastern Europe, 1 in 4 LGBTQ+ people felt discriminated against when job searching or working, and a US study found that openly gay men faced lower likelihoods of being invited to a first-round interview than otherwise identical straight men. In Nepal, 18% of lesbians studied reported not getting a job and 13% losing their job. It is unlikely that these patterns don't continue across the Global South. LGBTQ+ NGOs will often focus on similar topics, such as human rights abuses. By doing this, the development industry is forgetting to address major issues in the lives of LGBTQ+ people, allowing them to slip through the cracks and fall into poverty. Whether or not they choose to be out, LGBTQ+ people can be held back by things out of their control. Men, on average, earn more than women. Because there is an assumption that the man is the main breadwinner, the development industry often focuses their efforts on improving job prospects for men. This is a problem for lesbians, as they earn drastically less than their male counterparts. The 2011 census in India showed that 46% of the population whose gender identity was identified as other were literate, compared with 74% of the population who identified as cisgender. Discrimination in one area, such as education, can impact many other areas, such as employment. By having lower literacy rates, they are held back to jobs that don't require an ability to read and write. Many LGBTQ+ people are unemployed or underemployed, and this has many effects outside of just the workplace. For LGBTQ+ people, their ability to financially contribute to the family drastically affects their chances of being accepted. Families can play a major role in our growing up. Investments spent on children have been shown to affect the productivity as an adult. Research has found that, on average, boys are given larger and more nutritious meals than girls. It is not a stretch to expect that LGBTQ+ perceived children might face a similar fate. When the family isn't supportive, money is a key ingredient for freedom. Lesbians in particular need financial independence to be able to show their true identity. But very few LGBTQ+ people will fight their family for their rights to land or inheritance. For so many people, family is a major part of their lives. Addressing the economic challenges for LGBTQ+ people can make a really big difference in this area. As we've seen throughout these episodes, rarely is an issue a standalone concept. It almost always links and ties into other areas. This is why I will also quickly discuss health, an area which in this case connects with economics. Injuries and trauma from the physical, psychological and structural violence LGBTQ+ people face reduces their ability to work. LGBTQ+ people face elevated rates of depression, anxiety, suicidality, HIV/AIDS and substance abuse compared to their heterosexual equivalents. This is likely linked to minority stress and inadequate health services for LGBTQ+ people. An example of this is the travesti people in Peru. The majority of the population is poor and excluded from expensive body transformation programs, so instead they inject liquid silicone in their bodies. This has some major health risks, including disfigurement, substance migration, tumours, necrosis, infection, pulmonary embolism, or even death. Lacking economic means therefore affects their health. Not only are LGBTQ+ people more likely to struggle with their health, stopping them from working, but they are also more likely to not have enough money to take important treatment and healthcare steps to improve their situation. I know this has been a more statistics-heavy episode, but it shows that the information is there. The development industry has to choose to actively ignore information in order to not be addressing it. This isn't a theoretical debate, it is a reality. Until NGOs and other major players in the development industry choose to do something about it, we are failing a significant population. The development industry can do better, but not until it starts to address the inconsistencies and norms it chooses to follow. The development industry makes assumptions about what needs to be done, whilst ignoring major components to LGBTQ+ lives. The economics to being LGBTQ+, and the reality that many LGBTQ+ people face in the economy needs to be considered when doing development work. Not addressing the impact of the economy on LGBTQ+ people is missing out on what could be an excellent development opportunity. The needs are there. It's time they were addressed. Feminists mainstream gender issues in order to get them more effectively addressed within development. Gender mainstreaming involved integrating gender work into everyday legislation and programs rather than having specific gender-focused projects. But would this work for the LGBTQ+ community? It is difficult to know whether issues would actually be effectively addressed by doing this, or whether issues would be left semi-addressed. But something needs to be done. Where we are now, with everything I have explored over these episodes and so many more areas, the development industry is not doing enough. They are ignoring LGBTQ+ issues, and it's dangerous. The longer issues remain unaddressed, the more lives are put on the line. In a future ideal world, LGBTQ+ people may just exist within society, their gender and sexual identity playing no defining role. But we aren't in that space right now, and for as long as there are structural inequalities affecting gender and sexual minorities, it matters. LGBTQ+ issues matter, and they aren't going to be fixed if we don't put the energy in. The LGBT community are people. They are individuals suffering. Seeing them as unimportant to development or sexual deviance, picking and choosing what issues to fix, or bulldozing over specific Global South needs with our Western ideas is not addressing the problem. It's addressing our imagined problems. We can do better, and it's time we did.